Welcome to episode 36 of the SWNZ Podcast, the podcast for New Zealand Star Wars fans. My name is Matt.
And my name is Christy.
It was another week of really interesting Star Wars news, so let's just jump into it. First up, a little bit out of the blue, was the announcement that coming on October the 1st on Disney Plus is a LEGO Star Wars special called Terrifying Tales. I'll just run through the official synopsis for this. After the events of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, Poe Dameron and BB-8 must make an emergency landing on the volcanic planet Mustafar, where they meet the greedy and conniving Grabala the Hutt. The crime boss has purchased Darth Vader's castle and is renovating it into the galaxy's first all-inclusive Sith-inspired luxury hotel. While waiting for his X-Wing to be repaired, Poe, BB-8, Grabala and Dean, a plucky and courageous young boy who works as Grabala's mechanic, venture deep into the mysterious castle with Vader's loyal servant, Van-A. Along the way, Van-A shares 3 creepy stories linked to ancient artifacts and iconic villains from across all eras of Star Wars. Now, those of you familiar with Star Wars comics will recognise this premise as being very similar to that formed the basis for the Tales from Vader's Castle comics series, wherein we get retelling of Halloween-type stories that are sort of embellished from the point of view of the person telling the story. So this fits in quite well with the sort of LEGO approach to storytelling, where it's not canon but leans heavily on sort of canon events and embellishes them and expands upon them. It's an interesting list of voice actors that are associated with this. We've got Jake Green as Poe Dameron. He played Poe Dameron in the LEGO Star Wars Holiday Special that came out late last year. Rafael Alejandro as Dean. Dana Snyder as Grabala the Hutt, who voiced Grabala back in the LEGO Star Wars Freemaker Adventures. Tony Hale as Van-A. Christian Slater as Ren. Trevor Duvall as Emperor Palpatine. He voiced Emperor Palpatine in both the Freemaker Adventures and the Holiday Special. And Mary Elizabeth McGlynn playing a robot called Nihilate. She played Governor Price in Star Wars Rebels, and some of you may remember or may have taken the opportunity to meet her when she attended Armageddon Expo a little while back locally. Nihilate's a bit of an interesting addition because that RA-7 protocol droid actually appeared as a pack-in minifig with the recent Imperial TIE Fighter LEGO set, 75300 LEGO set. This is a droid that was actually active on board the second Death Star 4 years after the Battle of Yavin, so around the time of Return of the Jedi. So it's interesting to see something harking back to that era, but still being in the sequel era. And the addition of Christian Slater as a character called Ren is also interesting. Ren is a character that first showed up in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic series. Ren is a Force-sensitive human who led the Knights of Ren during the era of the New Republic prior to Ben Solo becoming Kylo Ren.
I enjoy the LEGO animated shorts and series. They might be aimed a little bit more at kids, but I think that they're fun. It'll be interesting to see, because this one obviously has a bit more of a Halloween horror theme to it, whether it will still be as sort of kid-friendly and funny with sort of humorous moments like the other LEGO series. Obviously, LEGO does have a large children's audience, or whether this will actually have some genuinely spooky stuff in it. So I'm really keen to see it. And I'm really interested to see some well-known voice talent in this one. Tony Hale, who has a very well-known comedic acting run. He's also done voice work for Disney as the voice of Forky in the Toy Story movie. And obviously Christian Slater, that's a little bit of a sort of a left field one. I wasn't aware that he did much voice acting, but interestingly joining in a LEGO Star Wars tale, that kind of adds a little bit of sort of an extra fun, and I'm very keen to see these new characters, so I'm sure it'll be fun for young and old.
Yeah, they are generally done well. They're generally watchable, and this is just a one-off special, so it's worth checking out. You don't have a lot to lose in terms of time by investing in it. But there's often a lot of really fun Easter eggs and, quite, want to use the word sophisticated, maybe not overly complex, but at least interesting levels of humour in the way Easter eggs are inserted in a sort of humorous way, or connections to other aspects of the previous stories.
I know a lot of the LEGO, like the Droid Tales ones, were specifically aimed at kids, but I felt the Freemaker Adventures were actually they had a lot of notes in it that I think really did appeal to if you're fans of some of the other Star Wars animated series. They were short, not obviously quite as involved as like Clone Wars or such, but I felt like it sits alongside something like Resistance or not quite Rebels level, but I find the stories in that one quite interesting. And I think it's a shame that it probably didn't get as much of a market because it came under the Lego umbrella. I think if it had just been a cute little animated series, perhaps more people would have given it a chance. So I'm hoping this sort of terrifying tales sort of Halloween one, because obviously it's coming out October 1st, so they're going for the Halloween market, which isn't quite a big market in New Zealand, but obviously the American market is very big on Halloween. So this makes a lot of sense, and I'm hoping it'll be fun.
I get a feeling it's going to be a little bit more aligned with the Freemaker Adventures and the Holiday Special as compared to the early Lego material. I think the earlier Star Wars Lego material suffered a little bit because it was hard to really sort of follow how it all fit together. There were lots of bits and pieces that had a real clear sort of clustering of story arcs or anything. And obviously that was prior to Disney Plus, so it was hard to know exactly how or where to access it in a timely manner. But now we have, a solid base for all this sort of content, and we know when it's coming out in advance, and it's much easier to access. Okay, let's talk about the Galactic Starcruiser Hotel that we've talked about recently in a couple of podcasts and a couple of instances. In the past week, a video trailer came out, but also information about the pricing and the itinerary. Now, this is very interesting, and I have to admit right from the get-go that it's a little higher than we sort of anticipated in terms of the cost, but we'll talk about that in a little bit of detail. The video trailer itself was interesting. It gave us some information. It showed alien characters in full costume, which was quite cool to see. There is an itinerary that comes out that sort of confirms the timelines of the experience. As we've said before many times, this is a fully immersive experience where every aspect of the time you spend there is supposed to feel like you are part of the Star Wars galaxy. It's been described as a 2-day, 2-night event. It does in fact start at 1 p.m. on the first day, and it goes through to 9:30 a.m. for departure on the day following. So it's really a little bit over a day and a half, all up in terms of content. That content includes learning to play sabacc, dinner with music from live bands with aliens in them, training to run the bridge of the Starcruiser, traveling to the galaxy's edge at the parks for the Rise of Resistance and Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run rides. That takes up the morning of the main day of the event, returning to the hotel after lunch for lightsaber training, droid racing, build a motto ship, and what they're describing as a spectacular finale on the final evening. So there's definitely some cool aspects to this, but those timelines are also, in fact, I have to admit, a little bit tighter than we first anticipated or interpreted from the description of it being a 2-day and 2-night event. So the pricing, so again, this is a little bit hard to interpret the way they've described it, and this will change. This is just initial pricing for the initial surge of people who are going to want to take it on or are going to want to attend. That pricing may change or drop off depending on a number of different factors. So the pricing is described as applying for a standard cabin. There are also larger suites, including a Grand Captain suite that hosts up to 8 passengers. But for the standard pricing, 2 guests per cabin comes in at $1,209 per guest per night for a $4,809 US dollars total. That's New Zealand $6,830. 2 adults and 1 child comes in at $5,300 US dollars, which is New Zealand $7,500. And if you've got 3 adults and a child, pricing comes in at $6,000 US dollars or New Zealand $8,520. Now, when we talked about this a little while back, we kind of speculated that the pricing might be akin to what we see on Disney cruises, but I think it's fair to say it's quite a bit higher than that, a number of times higher than that, which is an interesting approach to take, and it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out.
I often look to a lot of the Disney content creators on YouTube to see how the pricing for specific Disney things sort of fit in with the expectations, because obviously for us here in New Zealand, any Disney activity is going to obviously incur the cost of international travel. So I'm always curious, because it's already got a sort of an expensive starting point for us, we've got to travel all the way to California or Florida. So it was interesting to see how some of the other Disney bloggers, content creators and the like were going to react to this sort of price point. Obviously, Disney has a lot of big tiers. You can get hotels at Disney World that start at sort of like $150, $200 a night, and you can easily go up to the sort of cabins and things like that are $1,000 US a night. And it's not uncommon for Americans to treat themselves to those sorts of experiences. You obviously get perks with those price tiers. You get closer to the parks, you get, a direct travel to the parks and things like that. So obviously you and I haven't gone on a Disney cruise. That is something on our wish list, but still it's obviously off in the future at the moment with international travel. But so I was curious to see what people that have gone and done some of the more luxe Disney experiences would think of this price point. And it looks like people are sort of like, ooh, that is a little more expensive than they were thinking. Even just the 2-guest cabin, like a standard sort of double-sized bedroom, is about $2,000 more than people were expecting. And that's $2,000 US more than people were expecting. And that's a bit of a jump up. Obviously, a cruise ship, I think the standard Disney cruise ship has about 1,200 rooms, or maybe a little over, and this Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser hotel only has 100 rooms. Now that's a lot less, and it looks like the cast to guest ratio is going to be a lot higher. So I think that is obviously a part of the pricing structure. They're going to have to pay for a lot of staff in costume, being role players, doing specific small group activities like lightsaber training. That's not going to be all 100 guests, 100 rooms worth of guests all doing lightsaber training at once. It's going to be very small clusters. Yes.
Managed by a single person, yeah.
So it really is up there in terms of, it's not crazy, like out of the question.
Well, look, you look at the highest one, it's $750 per guest per night. $750 for a hotel night stay. It's not unheard of. You can see that by looking online fairly commonly, fairly easily. But the bottom line is, I think it's higher than most people, and certainly that's what we've encountered online, higher than what most people expected.
This is definitely going to be one of those one and done type things. I don't think there's going to be too many people that would do this on a regular basis. And I think that's kind of what people were hoping to be able to do, that you could do it maybe once every couple of years. But at this price point, it's running close to being able to stay at the Disney parks for a week or more. And considering that most of the activities are constrained within the hotel, that's quite sort of a compact way to spend that amount of money. It's very condensed. You're spending it in a small area, really, of the parks. You're not free to go and explore Galaxy's Edge for a whole day. You're doing it as part of a very sort of confined tour group, and the rest of your money is being spent doing activities around your hotel, which is a little bit different than a cruise line. Cruise lines go to actual places. You can go to beaches and things like that on the Disney Cruise Line. And this one, you're just going around rooms in your hotel. So it's got a little bit of that. But I get the feeling Disney's really trying to make this as kind of a wow experience, hence the price point. They don't want to sort of cut any corners on this. But it is going to be very, very pricey if you are a family with kids. Obviously, if you're a couple that just really want to sort of dive in and do the sort of luxury experience, you're looking at nearly 7,000 New Zealand dollars for this experience, which, if you just want to do it once in your life, you can probably save up and justify that if you are an Uber fan. The advertising material and the text seems to imply that you can fully cosplay in this style. Obviously, that's comes with some limitations. I'm sure they don't want people running around fully dressed up as Darth Vader, but the family shown in the video trailer is fully wearing like Jedi robes, and sort of there is some artwork that seems to imply that if you want to wear Twi'lek Leku headpieces, or whether you're a big Ahsoka fan, you could dress up with the full sort of Togruta headpiece. So that's going to add a bit of a fun, but again, they're not going to be able to completely control the immersion. There are still going to be people sitting at the dinner tables next to you wearing just Star Wars t-shirts. They can't force people to cosplay. So it's going to be interesting to see whether the full immersion is going to live up to Disney's hopes and expectations.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because so far all we've got is, and obviously this is going to be the case until it opens, so far all we've got is information from Disney itself and from the Imagineers and so forth, which is going to be heavily biased and fairly limited. It's going to be super interesting when we see people actually attending and how they interpret and what information they tell us.
We know that sometimes the people that go to Disney or do Star Wars things aren't the biggest passionate fans. They just happen to be people with money that can buy these things, and they're just like, oh, let's go see what this is like, They do the tours at Disneyland because they just want somebody to sort of get them to bypass the ticket lines and things like that, So it'll be interesting to see how many sort of really passionate Star Wars fans will be able to go on this straight away and what they think their opinion of the price point and the experience. Is it really going to be as fun as Disney is sort of making it out to be? Obviously.
And I'm also wondering to what extent it's going to be applicable to adults versus kids. That's quite a tricky balance as to making it really appeal to kids or making it appeal to the older, hardcore, long-term Star Wars fan who's working now and has the money to do such things. That's going to be an interesting, tricky balance, I think.
Oh, it almost feels like this is a sort of thing where even if you have kids, you're going to leave them with your grandparents so that you can go do this, because I don't think a 5-year-old's really going to appreciate the expense and the immersion of this. They're just going to think it's like a Disney park. Yeah, They're not going to really understand how much it costs. And you don't want to miss out on lightsaber training because you've got a kid having a tantrum that needs to go have a nap or something like that. I think what you're going to see is that it's mostly grown-ups treating themselves to a weekend away while the kids stay with relatives so that you can get the full immersion you want without having sort of real-world parental responsibilities in the way. And also just for the hardcore Star Wars fans that just want to treat themselves to sort of, it's not quite an unbuyable sort of thing, but it's certainly something up there that people are going to have to save, because that's a pretty fair amount of Star Wars toys that you can buy for $8,500 New Zealand dollars. That's a lot.
So I don't know when they're going to open bookings for this. It's probably not too far off. They did say that it's going to be August, September next year. They narrowed down the opening timing a little bit in terms of when the first batch of bookings is going to be, actually taking place. So it's a little while before we get a lot more really solid, unbiased information. We're looking at August, September next year, but we'll be talking about it from time to time between now and then, I'm sure.
I'm curious to see how many New Zealanders are actually keen to visit the Star Wars hotel. Obviously, there's a big distance and cost incurred just getting there on top of the hotel package.
Oh, and additional cost, because you won't be just staying there for 2 nights. There'll probably be some accommodation on either side of that.
But I know that being in New Zealand, travel always comes with this extra cost. And over the past couple of years, we've seen an increase in New Zealanders and Australians traveling to the Star Wars conventions because we want a bigger dose of Star Wars than we can get locally. There is no Disney park close that has this kind of Star Wars immersion in it. Obviously, if any of the Asian Disney parks had a full Galaxy's Edge, they might be a little bit closer, maybe a little bit more cost efficient for us. But at this point, if you want Galaxy's Edge, you've got to go to the US. So I'm keen to know how many of you are turned off by the price point, how many of you will go, okay, now I know a ballpark, I'm going to start saving because I need to go there. Let us know in the comments.
And I'll just wrap up the news round out by passing on our condolences to the family of Jonathan Rinzler. Star Wars author Jonathan Rinzler, who wrote under the name J.W. Rinzler, many of you will know as the author of the very cool trilogy of Making of Star Wars books. He sadly passed away at the age of 58 in the past week after a brief battle with cancer, but he made quite an impact on a number of our libraries. The Making of books had an insane amount of very cool detail, and he was sort of known as a very comprehensive researcher of Star Wars behind-the-scenes material and putting that into some really very interesting books. And he covered a number of other franchises as well. He wrote some fiction as well as non-fiction books. He was attributed as the author of the Star Wars graphic novel, which was a graphic novel based on the very early drafts, George Lucas's very early drafts of the Star Wars script, which was a really interesting take on the Star Wars universe and Star Wars content. So sad to hear of the passing of Jonathan Rinzler.
Another little bit of trivia about Rinzler is he is the namesake for the Rinzler character in Tron Legacy. He got this name because he had authored books for things like Indiana Jones and Star Wars, and obviously had sort of a following in the sort of behind-the-scenes book ones. And he was the Lucasfilm executive editor at the time. And so he got that sort of nod in Tron Legacy. So it's neat that he has a lasting legacy. And we are very sorry for his family to have lost him at such a young age.
Moving on to product announcements and store reports. First up, something that's not available just yet, but it was really quite interesting to see the latest Hot Toys 12-inch figure announced from The Mandalorian. Luke Skywalker as seen in the final episode of The Mandalorian. 2 versions of this very cool 12-inch figure. A standard version featuring his new, younger head sculpt, Jedi cloak, light-up lightsaber, base backdrop, and comes with even Baby Yoda Grogu himself. There's also a deluxe edition that has all of that, as well as a battle-damaged Dark Trooper. I think the timing of this possibly relates to the upcoming, on the 25th of August, behind-the-scenes Disney Gallery episode that's specifically focusing on the final episodes of Season 2 of The Mandalorian, where we see how the Luke Skywalker cameo/appearance actually was created.
Hot Toys is really knocking it out of the park with all the Mandalorian merch at the moment, honestly, with the multiple versions of The Mandalorian, multiple versions of Boba Fett, and now we're getting things like Luke Skywalker. It's going to be a hard temptation on the wallet for fans of 12-inch, fans of Luke, fans of The Mandalorian. It looks like it's going to be an amazing figure with all those extra bits in there. And when Hot Toys inevitably releases Dark Troopers, that's going to be quite the fun scene if you want to buy multiple Dark Troopers and put Luke there in the middle with one battle-damaged one from the deluxe set. That's going to make a pretty impressive display on a bookshelf.
Yeah, Dark Troopers are up for pre-order. I don't know the exact release date off the top of my head, but they are quite an imposing figure in the 12-inch scale because of their shoulder width and so forth. They're going to look quite cool en masse if you choose to set up a diorama along those lines. Just as a side note, on the topic of Luke Skywalker and his appearance in The Mandalorian, many of you will have heard that the YouTuber known as Shamook, who is famous for his Star Wars deepfakes that have been compared to the CGI younger versions that have shown up in Star Wars of characters, has become employed by Lucasfilm as a consequence of his content on YouTube. So it's quite cool to see someone basically doing what has amounted to a very focused online CV demonstration of their skills, being taken on board to contribute directly to Lucasfilm content and potentially Star Wars down the line.
For fans of Pandora jewelry, the Star Wars range of Pandora beads and jewelry has gotten a new Wave edition, which was very exciting to see during a recent trip. On top of the original wave, which included beads like Baby Yoda, BB-8, Darth Vader, we now have 5 new ones. We have Baby Yoda in his crib. The first Baby Yoda charm was just him by himself. This one has him in his crib, which I think renders a little better in the small charm size. We have a Death Star clip bead, which is designed to sort of hold in place to stop your charms rotating round. That works on the metal Pandora bracelets. We have a Millennium Falcon dangle charm, which is very similar to the one that was available at the US Disney parks a year or two back. This one has an additional little Star Wars logo charm with sort of a gold plating finish to it. So it looks a little different to the original one, but it's great if you were never able to travel to the US parks to get the original Millennium Falcon charm, because that deserves to be on a Star Wars bracelet. We also have a Yoda dangle charm. This has 2 discs with a cutout of Yoda with a enameled Dagobah background plate. Very, very pretty. That's one of my favorites from this new range. And lastly, we have a Han Solo and Leia kiss charm. This is similar to the R2 and 3PO open work charm of the first set. It has Han and Leia in sort of the moment just before they kiss in Empire Strikes Back, and we have the Millennium Falcon on the back. So that one's actually the cheapest charm. The charms range between 59 New Zealand dollars and 89 New Zealand dollars. I do appreciate that these Star Wars beads often tend to be cheaper than the Disney range. Some of the Disney charms can run up to 120 odd. So all of these are under $90. So if you want to add any of these ones, they'll be a perfect little birthday gift, not too expensive, or just to treat yourself. I'm certainly hoping to add a few more of these beautiful new silver charms to my Star Wars Pandora bracelet.
From New Zealand Mint, we've got another sort of sorry you missed it type of report, but there's a few interesting aspects to this one, I think. About a year ago, NZ Mint released a Boba Fett helmet in their high relief coins. These are thicker than usual coins with a lot more depth to their detail. They're made from 2 ounces of silver. They did a Boba Fett coin about this time last year. They've just re-released that in a coloured version. Now, they actually made this for one of their partners, and they've talked about releasing coins that they've made specifically for partners before without saying who that was. It's been revealed that that partner is a company called EMK, and they've got a specific website where you can actually buy New Zealand Mint coins, including obviously these exclusive made-for-partner coins. So this coloured Boba Fett coin was made for retailer partner EMK, and for one reason or another, NZ Mint actually managed to sell some of these on their website just briefly, but they sold out extremely quick. I think last time I looked, but possibly not at this point any longer. You can still get them through EMK, but it's interesting to look on the EMK coin site because they have quite a wide range of variant New Zealand Mint Star Wars coins that we didn't even really know about. They've got other colorized versions of like the Stormtrooper high relief coin and the Darth Vader high relief coin, and some gold plated or gold versions of Star Wars coins that haven't really been announced on the New Zealand Mint website. So a little bit interesting to learn that. And finally, in terms of store reports, quite a few different sites, the official Star Wars site and the official Tamagotchi website, were talking about the R2-D2 Tamagotchi that is coming out in a few months' time. It's due in November. It comes in two versions, a standard and hologram version. Basically, this is just a white or a blue shell. So this is a retro toy, very similar to the decades old now Tamagotchis, but probably with a few updated sort of interactive elements to it. The graphics are very similar to the retro material, but the way you interact with it may be a little bit updated in terms of the different games you can play, I think. That's $39 for pre-order at JB Hi-Fi, so if you like that sort of little distraction, and Star Wars distraction in your pocket, that's a pretty affordable price point. Alright, episode 14 of The Bad Batch, War Mantle. I've got a lot to talk about. I really love this episode. There's a lot of really cool detail and moved the story along quite a bit. We've got 2 more episodes now revealed and confirmed through D23.com and on StarWars.com Twitter account. 2 more episodes from tonight. It's going to be a 2-part episode, so tonight's episode will be a cliffhanger. But talking about episode 14, last week's episode, War Mantle. I'll start off just by describing that War Mantle was first mentioned in the 2016 film Rogue One, so a few years back now. It describes the initiative of the Galactic Empire that was enacted soon after the founding of the Empire that sought to fill the ranks of the burgeoning Imperial Army with conscripted soldiers, so we've seen that happening along the way in the Bad Batch. This was part of Vice Admiral Rampart's vision, and it was supported by Tarkin. So that kind of describes the passing of the mantle from clone troopers to stormtroopers, effectively. This episode opened with us seeing a clone commando, an unhelmeted, but the armor was specifically commando armor rather than clone trooper armor, being chased by a number of other troopers and massives, the animals we first saw in episode 2 on Tatooine with the Tusken Raiders. I thought this was interesting. They were basically focusing on the dogs, the massives chasing the trooper, because I didn't think they wanted us to see the troopers in high detail, because that came a little bit later. So it transpires that this trooper that was being chased is Gregor, who sent a distress signal to Captain Rex, who in turn contacted the Bad Batch. And I thought it was very interesting to see Rex still in contact with the Bad Batch and sort of seeing them as someone that should be contacted or could be contacted if he needed that sort of help. So it turns out that the planet Darrow is an Imperial base where conscripted troopers are being trained by clone commandos to replace the clone trooper army. Hunter, Tech and Echo infiltrate the base while Omega and Wrecker stay on the ship as backup. Bad Batch rescue Gregor, but Hunter is captured during the escape. Back on Kamino, Lama Su and Nala Se plan to escape after the Empire cancels the clone army contracts, but they're caught by Admiral Rampart, and in a slightly sinister closing, Rampart says that he's got use for a scientist, so that's Nala Se, but not so much use for a politician, Lama Su.
The episode ends with clone troopers with their blasters drawn in front of Lama Su, but we don't hear any blaster fire, so I don't know if that was for the sake of they're just capturing him, or they're just trying not to depict an execution in an animated series. But yeah, things are not looking good for the Kaminoans.
No. So there's a lot to talk about and break down, so I'm going to jump around a little bit here. I'll start by talking about Gregor, the clone commando who was the first character we saw in this episode. CC5576 Gregor, we first saw him in Season 5 of the Clone Wars, Episode 12, at which time he seemingly sacrificed himself in an explosion to help others escape. But we learnt when he made a reappearance in a number of episodes in Rebels from Season 2 of Rebels that he survived that explosion.
And he even references that in this episode, that he had survived an explosion, so which is sort of a nod back to his origin stories.
I think he's a really fun character. I like his, I love Clone Republic Commandos, I love the armor. I actually liked his paint job with the sort of orangey yellow paint apps. Is quite a cool style. So I think he's a fun and interesting character, and it's interesting that they've inserted him here in between his Clone Wars and Rebels appearance effectively. Now, a lot of this episode centers around this new Imperial base where we see what they're calling TK troopers, i.e. stormtroopers, being the replacement for the clone troopers. We see clone commandos training these troopers, so we see a lot of the stormtroopers, the new stormtroopers, and a smaller number of Republic commandos, clone commandos. And this is an aspect that actually harks back to the Karen Travis Republic Commando novels, where we have previously seen clone commandos taking on the role of training standard troopers. It's a long-standing sort of established notion in the Star Wars galaxy. Now, most of you will have immediately recognised when they first revealed the non-clone TK troopers that they're heavily inspired by Ralph McQuarrie's original Stormtrooper designs. Ralph McQuarrie did quite a few variants of the Stormtroopers, some as just sketches and some as full paintings, but without a doubt, these new early versions of Stormtroopers are basically Ralph McQuarrie troopers, and we've seen those released in a number of different product forms, most recently pop vinyls from Funko, but also there's been action figure versions. I find it a very interesting and quite cool way to bridge that gap between prequel era and the original trilogy era by using this sort of concept material and leaning heavily on it. It looks very cool.
Considering that the concept designs of the Stormtroopers were essentially the very, very first Stormtroopers that came before the version that we see finally in A New Hope, it's neat that they've kind of solidified them as part of the evolution between Clone Trooper to Stormtrooper. So I was quite excited to see these.
Yeah, and so talking also about the Clone Commandos, which we saw many of, it really stood out when most of the clone commandos were just standard white armor, but one of them jumped out as looking pretty much like the paint job of Scorch, aka RC-1262 from the Republic Commando novels and Republic Commando video game, and later seen in Season 3 of the Clone Wars as part of Delta Squad alongside Boss, Fixus and Sev. So there was an official description of this episode on StarWars.com that said he was a clone, was based on, or the paint job was based on Scorch, but it's identical. So I think it's pretty much safe to say this is Scorch. The only main differences were he was using a DC-15A blaster carbine instead of the standard Clone Commando issue DC-17M, and he had a different backpack. He didn't have his wide backpack with the additional sort of upright canisters. He just had a standard Republic Commando backpack that didn't have his ID number lit up on the back as they do in the game. But for all intents and purposes, this was Scorch. Interesting to see him in the episode, and we'll see if he shows up again in these upcoming closing episodes. It
was almost kind of sad to see Republic Commandos being on the side of the Empire. I always like to think of them as being, the classic good guys from the Galactic Republic. It always kind of hurts a little bit when you see so many clone troopers fighting for the Empire, but there was something about the Clone Commandos, because they are kind of an elite, they're sort of higher ranking.
Well, they're usually independent squads. They usually function a little bit more independently in squads of four, as in Delta Squad or Omega Squad.
Yeah, so because we've been following along with Clone Force 99, it sort of feels like, because they themselves wear components of Clone Commando armor.
They're not Clone Commandos technically, but effectively they are a Clone Commando squad.
Yeah, so it's kind of sad to be reminded that yes, most of the clone troopers still are following orders from the Empire, and I don't know, I'm still kind of holding out that we'll see a little bit more of an uprising among some of the clone troopers, particularly the ones that were sort of higher ranked, like we saw in a previous episode where one of the commanders decides that no, this isn't right.
Yeah, we talked about this last week, but it's sort of come to a head. That notion even feels a little bit stronger this time around when we, as you say, specifically see commandos training TKs.
And we're seeing from Gregor again in this one that not everyone that has an inhibitor chip is just following blindly what the Empire is ordering them to do. We have yet another clone trooper that's like, no, this isn't right, and tried to defect and escape. So I don't know if this is just kind of drip feeding us little examples of more and more clone troopers sort of wanting to leave the Empire. As Gregor says, the Empire doesn't take kindly to defection, which is obviously why he was hunted down and captured. So I'm still holding out hope that we'll see a few more clone troopers manage to escape the clutches of the Empire, like the Bad Batch. There could be quite the sort of underground of ex-clone troopers running around the galaxy helping out. And I kind of want to see them join up with the beginnings of the rebellion.
Yeah, so this was the 14th episode that we're talking about. 2 more episodes to go. I think that episode 14, Momental, really sets the tone for the conclusion of the season. I think we're going to see some really action-packed episodes for these next 2 weeks. And I'm sure they're going to keep us on the edge of our seat between the episode 15 and episode 16. I hope episode 16 is not too much of a cliffhanger. We've talked previously about season 2 that's been presumed. It's actually been confirmed just today that season 2 will be taking place, season 2 of the Bad Batch. So that's something to look forward to as well.
This episode did end on a bit of a cliffhanger, which makes me wonder whether it is leading into the sort of climactic 2-part finale for season 1, where obviously we see Hunter not being able to escape with the rest of the Bad Batch and is captured by the troops on this planet. This episode was another one of those ones where Omega is trying to convince the Bad Batch to do what's right, even though it might be at risk to themselves. But in the past, they've always succeeded. And so she kind of, wins out. She was like, yes, I was right. We did the right thing. We helped the person and we can feel good about it. This time, she kind of pressured them.
The odds were so against them in terms of going back for Hunter that they just had to escape, survive, and work out how to rescue him at a later point. Yeah.
I think it's going to add a bit more of sort of a personal development moment for Omega, because she is young and a little naive, but it's always worked out. And this is the first time where she's like, no, we need to do the right thing. And they're going, no, it's dangerous. And this time it really has worked out not in their favor. We didn't see quite her reaction at the end. It kind of ended on Hunter being surrounded by troops, him knowing that nope, he's not going to get out of this one. And we see Crosshair right there at the end being sort of relishing the moment of finally capturing one of his prey from the Bad Batch. And he says he wishes he caught more of them, but Hunter will do. Obviously Hunter is kind of more his mainline opponent because he is the leader of the Bad Batch. He's the one that he's got the biggest grudge against. So that definitely puts the Bad Batch in quite a peril. They're not going to want to just abandon Hunter to whatever the Empire has in store for him, but it's looking pretty tricky about how they can possibly get him out. They managed to get Gregor out, but obviously the Empire knows that they've got people trying to break into their prison cells, so they're not exactly going to let that happen twice. So I don't know how this is going to work out. And It was also a moment seeing Echo remind the Bad Batch that they had broken in to rescue him, even when it looked like it was going to be impossible. So there's that kind of reminding each other of what they're doing, and it's got to be hard, like if you sort of sympathize with the Bad Batch, they're obviously struggling to survive. They don't want to put themselves in harm's way because they've got enough sort of heat on their back from the Empire trying to track them down. Crosshair's got a grudge, but they're always torn between this self-preservation, being selfish, trying to survive, and then their honor that's kind of built in. They want to do the right thing. They want to help people out like good soldiers. It's kind of the opposite to Crosshair's good soldiers follow orders no matter what that is, and they are trying to be good soldiers for honor outside of themselves. But this was one instance where it obviously didn't all go as planned. I did like the little moment where the Gonk droid helps replenish the shields. Yeah. It kind of felt a little bit like a little moment of R2 helping the Naboo starfighter escape the blockade in episode 1, and when Anakin plays with his toggles during the pod race to get his engines back up and running again there.
The visuals in the storyboarding totally echoed the episode 1 scene, where you saw the plug going in to convert power from one source to another, and then the digital readout, and then the escape. So that very much echoed episode 1, and I thought it was very cool seeing the Gonk droid used in that way.
Yeah, he's been on the ship and as kind of like a little comedic moment from time to time, but it was neat to see this cute little sort of background character really kind of come through and save the day and help them escape.
He always had a face look. I know he doesn't have a face, but he always had a facial expression. Obviously it's just sort of, they wander around, make funny noises, but when it came time to do something that, was his role in life, he got this real look of focus on his inanimate face. It was quite cool.
Yeah. And another moment I kind of liked, which was kind of in the background, is when they were running round the base hallways that looked very, very imperial. I did appreciate that the soundtrack felt very sort of classic John Williams, classic Star Wars music. It kind of helped remind you that this is the beginning of the Empire. Even though we're watching the Bad Batch running around, the hallways felt completely imperial, like we've seen later on. And it just kind of not exactly sinister, but that kind of reminding that this is the Empire now, and alongside the sort of the first version of the TK stormtroopers.
In terms of just jumping around a little bit, the only thing I would have really, really loved to have seen, we saw new versions or different versions of the early stormtroopers, but we saw those same versions of white armored stormtroopers flying the V-wings. I would have thought it would have been really cool if I'd seen some black pilot variants flying the V-wings. That's my only thing that I would have personally loved to have seen. But all in all, this was a fantastic episode, and a lot of very cool action, a lot of very cool detail and references and nods to previous material. I think it really sets the tone for the upcoming 2 episodes, and I'm super stoked to get that official confirmation that there's going to be a season 2 to look forward to next year.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was just going to be sort of like a short stopgap. Let's play around with a little bit more Clone Wars content that we didn't quite get to squeeze into the final season because it would sort of jump around a little bit. But I am fully invested in this series, and I really do hope that we get more than just like 2 seasons out of it. I'd love to see it kind of go on. I know that the animation team isn't above killing off characters. We did see some characters kind of get their story arcs cut short in the likes of Rebels and things like that. I won't go into spoilers there in case you haven't finished watching Rebels, but I'm kind of hoping that we don't see the Bad Batch meet similar fates. I want this team to continue on. I want to see them go through adventures and finally sort of end up with the rebellion in some way. I think seeing young Hera and young Omega really solidified that in my mind. I want to see them together in the future fighting for the rebellion.
Yeah, well, season 2 could have a completely different tone. I mean, this one's been about the establishment of the Empire. Season 2 could be completely different. It could be about the establishment of the rebellion. It does give me confidence that we will see the entirety of Bad Batch and Omega plus or minus Crosshair. I don't know. It gives me confidence that we'll see them still as a cohesive group without any risk to any of them not making it through. Alrighty, that's about it for this installment. I guess we're done doing talking. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us share our passion for Star Wars. Stay tuned to our website, SWNZ.co.nz, for Star Wars news for New Zealanders, and another podcast episode next week and every Friday. And don't forget, you can jump on over to either our Facebook group or the SWNZ message boards to discuss all the latest Star Wars news with other Kiwi fans. Thank you for listening.
And may the Force be with you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, go ahead and like the video, check out the SWNZ Podcast playlist for our other episodes, and subscribe for alerts about new episodes. See you next time.